Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching India Tonight with me, Sumita Karir, and my colleague and co-host Jude Sanith is joining on the broadcast live from our Chennai studios. Tonight, we put the spotlight on a story that has larger future geopolitical ramifications. Well, there could be a potential meeting with US President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, and that could happen possibly as early as next week. But could this summit pave the way for an end to the Russia-Ukraine war that is now in its third year? And what does it mean for India, which is facing steep US tariffs over its Russian oil purchases? Now, the White House has hinted at renewed US efforts to broker peace, with Donald Trump being open to meeting both Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In fact, a recent meeting between Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff and Putin in Moscow was described as quote-unquote highly productive. However, Putin has signaled openness to a meeting with Zelensky, but insists that the conditions aren't right yet. And Russian media has suggested that the Kremlin may be stalling to maintain its battlefield gains. But Jude, that's not the only story we're discussing on the show tonight.
Absolutely, Sumita, and let's bring India into the picture. Well, as things stand, Russia's oil exports remain a massive lifeline for its war effort, with both India and China remaining top buyers. And well, we all know of Trump's elevated tariffs on India, an additional 25%, making it 50% in all for just its energy trade with Russia. Now, if Trump's meeting with Putin does lead to a ceasefire, what it could potentially do is ease pressure on India, potentially leading for a tariff rollback. Now, is a breakthrough certain between Russia and Ukraine? For now, the world watches, even as Trump's high-stakes diplomacy unfolds, with implications for Ukraine's future and India's economic ties with the US. To discuss all this and more, we're joined with a battery of guests. We have Gaurav Sansanwal, Fellow for the Chair on India and Emerging Asia Economics, Manoj Joshi, Distinguished Fellow, ORF, and Ksenia Kondrateva, Senior Russian Journalist. Thank you so much for joining us at this hour. Gaurav, if I could start with you. This talk of a potential meeting between the US President and his Russian counterpart, at the outset, it does seem like it's good news all around. Good news for the hope that the war will hopefully soon end. Good news for the fact that it could ease pressure on India, especially given this climate of tariffs that has beset us over the last few days now. So all around, good news, you reckon, Gaurav?
Most certainly, Jude. I think there is definitely an opening here. As we know, President Trump, his election campaign promise was to resolve the war in Ukraine. And of course, in the past few months, we've seen repeated attempts at reaching that conclusion. But this is probably the most significant breakthrough, since it leads to a direct meeting between the two leaders. But, you know, from the Indian context, I must say that while geopolitics is part of the equation here, there are other economic and trade issues too that the two countries would need to get over for the deal to happen. As we know, President Trump wants to sell more to India. That is a situation that is not unique to India. It is something that he's done with a number of allies and partners around the world. And so when he wants to sell more to India, India has to find more room to be able to buy across different sectors. And there is obviously a difference of opinion on what those look like. So keeping that in mind, I would say that yes, this is a good opening, but we should not get carried away because while geopolitics will help, there's a lot more that would need to happen to get this deal and this relationship back on track.
Absolutely, Gaurav. As you put that into perspective, we'll have to see what really transpires when a team from the United States arrives in India and the kind of negotiations and talks that they hold. But definitely, geopolitics does play a role, at least from the looks of it. But let me come to you, Mr. Joshi. Now, what made Putin, in your opinion, agree for this sort of a meeting, given the fact that there at least have been 3 rounds of talks, between President Trump and Vladimir Putin? And would a peace deal brokered by Donald Trump, would it even be enforceable?
Well, one reason is that the Russians are doing reasonably well on the battlefield, meaning the Ukrainians are finding it quite difficult. The Russians advance on the battlefield is very slow, but it's still there. And as far as the air is concerned, the Russians are bombarding Ukraine almost at will. So with the success in the battlefield, Putin feels that he has no real reason to worry about a meeting. He's not. He's going into the meeting as someone who is winning the war rather than someone who's losing the war, and so therefore he wants to see, what does Trump have to offer? What is Trump talking about, and what will Trump? What does Russia get in an exchange if it agrees to make a peace? We know the conditions of peace. That is that the Russians occupy parts of eastern Ukraine as well as Crimea, and also that Ukraine no longer seeks NATO membership. Now, these are very difficult conditions. So I am not very optimistic about a positive outcome from this. Trump is still quite capable of walking away because he's not going to get Zelensky to agree on the kind of terms that Putin is placing right now.
Right, Manoj, thanks so much for summing that up for us quite aptly. Let's get the Russian voice on the issue. Senia, if I could quickly come over to you. There's been so much talk about the Russian role as far as the ceasefire is concerned, the potential for a ceasefire, rather. You've had President Volodymyr Zelensky talk in the past about how Russia has never been quite as serious about maintaining a ceasefire. The question to you is, what do you think does the Russian side have for itself with regard to any potential ceasefire? What's in it for Russia, really, Senia?
See, you are right. There have been a lot of developments here in Moscow in the past couple of days. And I think if Russia was not serious about reaching some kind of a resolution, I don't think we can really talk about a ceasefire at the moment, because there should be conditions for a ceasefire. And that's what Kremlin has stated multiple times, that those conditions are not even discussed. Russia has proposed its own condition. But when we think about the upcoming meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump next week, as we got the news from Kremlin today, we don't really have a clear understanding what U.S. has to offer, what it has in mind, what kind of ceasefire it could agreed on, because Russia has raised these concerns. Who will monitor the ceasefire? Who will monitor the violations of the ceasefire? Will it be complete, or will it be just aerial strikes? What are the details? For now, we have zero clarity on what the other side could agree on. And just to remind, there was a ceasefire previously agreed between two sides, and there was a violation, so it effectively didn't work. But if you recall, in around March, April, Russia has offered what they call an Easter ceasefire, and it was actually maintained by Russia, but it was violated by Ukraine, as Russia stated at that time. So we really have to see what kind of details are going to be discussed during the leaders' meeting, if that happens next week.
Right. Right, Senia. Let me ask you another question before we move on to our other panelists. Very rightly you put that there's been no clarity that has emerged from the United States, at least as of now, on the kind of concessions that Donald Trump is willing to give to Vladimir Putin. But he has definitely spoken about the threat of tougher sanctions on Russia and secondary sanctions on trading partners of Russia. But does Russia actually believe that he's serious about imposing these sanctions?
Again, Kremlin has maintained that the trade should not be weaponized, and it is clearly weaponized. It's quite sad, but it's also quite ironic that Russia has been talking about this for years now, as the conflict rages, and Russia's biggest partners and actually biggest economies like India, like Brazil, are now facing the reality of trade being weaponized. It's a very sad development, and I think Moscow has said it very clear that all nations should pursue their national interests, should walk in their national interest. India has released quite strongly worded statements this week, two statements actually. So again, as many experts from India, we have been hearing also are saying that these has to settle down. Of course, it looks dramatic at the moment, but it has to settle down. As for Russia, when we talk about more sanctions, see, Russia has been the most heavily sanctioned nation, and its economy has not collapsed as the Western nations thought it will. It is actually growing. So I think it is difficult to imagine what more sanctions could be there. If you see at Donald Trump's latest moves, including the move against India, it was against the oil purchases and, as the White House document states, the petrochemicals made out of Russian oil. So that clearly targets India, but it somehow doesn't target China. It somehow doesn't target EU, which has been the largest, one of the largest customers of India's refineries, for that matter. So I think there are lots of questions that have to be clarified.
No, that's a very valid point as well there. It's a very valid point, Sina. The fact is that Russia has had sanctions imposed on it in the past. It pretty much has borne the brunt of it, or aced through these sanctions being imposed on it. So what more? And that's why I want to bring back Gaurav again to this discussion. Gaurav, you heard Sina there talk about how Russia has really championed through these sanctions, in a sense, through the course of the war itself. So one wonders, if a situation comes about where Russia really has nothing much to lose in terms of having yet another bunch of sanctions imposed on it, what negotiating ground really does the US have when it does eventually sit down at the table with Russia? What does President Trump really have to offer when that discussion between President Trump and Putin actually does go about taking place in the next few days? What does the US have with it, Gaurav?
Well, Jude, going back to the basics here, the sanctions are successful when you know what the objective is. And so they may or may not have been successful to the extent of, crippling Russian economy. But if the objective is to get Russia to the negotiating table and to actively make an effort to get them to talk, then naturally to that extent, there is some amount of belief in Washington that that is possible. Sitting in Washington, there is a bipartisan law now that is being considered, which has momentum from both the political parties here, which is the Sanctioning Russia Act. And as part of that, the effort is to sanction other partners that are buying energy from Russia. And that is the context in which India obviously got looped in as well. But so given that now the objective is not just to sanction Russia, but there seems to be like an effort to squeeze a little bit of the other partners buying from Russia, that is a departure today, because earlier the Biden administration imposed a price cap and allowed countries to buy within that to maintain global price stability. But this time now, President Trump is determined to get Russia to the negotiating table. And to that extent, I think, there is belief that these new rounds of secondary sanctions are the ones that are going to be able to do that. Whether that happens or not, of course, remains to be seen, because as everyone noted, this has been going on a while, and a lot of these past attempts have not been successful. So we got to wait and watch here a little bit. This is certainly not the final word.
Absolutely, Gaurav. You make a very interesting point about the fact, which India has also mentioned in its statement at least twice, that it was the United States, the Biden administration, which actually encouraged other global leaders to diversify to Russia to maintain energy stability. And of course, the world cannot really be to adjust to change in US administrations. But let me come to you, Mr. Joshi. Now, since we're bringing in the India angle, Putin's also expected to visit India later this year. We're given to understand from sources Prime Minister Modi is traveling to the SCO summit this August. And will these options of a Russia-India-China axis come together? Will this option really push Trump to give sweetness to India when the team arrives here on August 25th, given the fact that he's earlier attacked BRICS countries? He's attacked, the BRICS gathering on their de-dollarization move.
Well, you see, the thing is, you've heard the Prime Minister today. The Prime Minister has made it very clear that India will not concede on agriculture and dairy. So what we will not do, I think, has been laid out by the Prime Minister himself. So then there is the option of Russian oil. So it's quite possible that India will stop buying Russian oil because oil can be purchased from elsewhere. It will take time, but it can be purchased from elsewhere. But that will certainly damage our relationship with Russia. So that has consequences. Now the question is, what are the Americans after? We are not clear what do the Americans looking for. Are they trying to break the India-Russia relationship? Or are they merely trying to get their tariffs through in some way or the other? Or are they really trying to stop the Ukraine-Russia war? See, all those things are not clear as yet. But as far as India is concerned, as I said, the Prime Minister has made the position clear on India's negotiation. So Russian oil certainly can be sacrificed, but it will extract a price. And that price has to do with our extremely deep and long relationship with Russia, which goes back to the 1950s. It's one of the longest relationships between two large countries anywhere. And so India has to really think hard as to whether it really wants to take that option. But India doesn't have too much leverage. See, the Chinese have leverage. They use their the strategic minerals and magnets to effect, but we have very little leverage. And so that's a big problem for us. But as I said, what really matters is what are the Americans looking for? And that is not clear. Are they looking to break our Russia-India business, or are they trying to break the BRICS? Maybe they're trying to break the BRICS because that's seen as a challenge to the US hegemony. President Trump has made noises about attacking BRICS several times. So that's clarity is not there. Of course, these summit meetings are going to happen. Incidentally, the India-Russia, it's not the Russia-India-China summit. What we're going to have is the annual Russia-India summit. And that is what President Putin will be here for. And that's what Mr. Doval has gone to Moscow to prepare for. And as far as the SCO is concerned, that will be a separate meeting where Prime Minister will go to China and meet the Chinese leader as well as possibly Putin. So there are a lot of meetings happening. A lot of these things can only be now dealt with at the apex level. You cannot have officials deal with this anymore. It has to be directly the head of state and against the head of state. They've got to talk it out and come to some kind of a conclusion.
Right. Let me bring in Senior on this. Senior, you heard Mr. Joshi speak about the possible implication of a Trump-Putin meeting and what impact it could have on Russia-India relationships, especially in a situation, hypothetical as it might sound right now, where India opts to not buy Russian oil or continue to make those purchases. How do you see this meeting between President Trump and President Putin, and in context of how the Russia-India relationship is bound to evolve from here on? Do you see any change to the status quo? And if yes, how much of an impact will it have on bilateral relationships between Russia and India?
Well, I think your own foreign ministry has responded to this question very well, saying that a relationship with Russia do not depend on the relationship with other countries and should not be seen through such a lens. They they are standalone-like relationship with any other country. Why a meeting between Putin and Trump should define how India-Russia relationship should go forward? I don't think that is the right way to say so. Of course, tariffs, buying or not buying oil, as Mr. Joshi said, these are the things that will be recalibrated. But the long-term vision, both in Moscow and in New Delhi, I think is quite firm, which we cannot really say. And I would agree with, again, Mr. Joshi, that this is not the case with the US. We don't really understand what is their long-term vision and what are they trying to do, globally, because I think both Moscow and New Delhi see multipolarity, a very different world order shaping up. They accept it. They are one of the actors of this multipolar world. That doesn't really go well with, Washington, whoever is in charge of the Oval Office, and have clearly seen that it's not just about Mr. Trump. Whatever administration is there in Washington, they do not like BRICS. They do not like countries, emerging powers, having independent foreign policy, or even the domestic policies. Some of the domestic policies, this is what India, in my understanding, is trying to do, trying to protect its agriculture, its farmers, and US is not clearly happy with that, because they are used to the way of dictating countries what their even internal policy, domestic policies should be.
Absolutely,
so I think,
right, Senior, you made a very important point, and Mr. Joshi. Right. So, Senior, you made a very important point about, the Russia-India ties and where do they move on from here, given the fact that this is an inflection point for both the countries to really sort of expand and revitalize the relationship. Gaurav, the big question then is, how will both the nations be looking at expanding their cooperation further? And what happens in case of an energy deal that happens between India and the United States?
No, Sumita, I think that would be really helpful here. I think the U.S.-India relationship right now needs a good moment, and that can come from the deal because as we have seen, these are two economies that are very services heavy, but
will
are
it not impact our ties
with Russia?
Will it not impact our ties with Russia?
No, sir. To some extent, yes. But we have to also remember that India was not buying oil in these quantities as it is doing now until before the war. So trade diversification and diversification of sources is going to be in India's energy security it will meet India's energy security objectives. So I don't think it's a zero-sum game. Yes, if India buys more oil from the US, it would add more diversification to its basket. But that doesn't mean that it would stop buying from other sources. Even now, the Middle East still makes up for more than 2/4 of the overall basket. So I think overall we have to look at this in a way that, like, this kind of economic uncertainty that is going on right now is not good for oil prices, and they have a spillover effect on commodity prices writ large. So doing a deal is in the best interest of everyone at the end of the day, because it maintains prices for the world at large. So my overall view, I think, in that context is that a US-India negotiation, a handshake, is the only way to stabilize markets and prices. And I think doing so would also help India's relationships with other powers, because it's not a zero-sum game, and there is room for everyone.
Right. Let's get Ms. Joshi to weigh in on that. Ms. Joshi, like Gaurav was saying, it certainly is not a zero-sum game. Do you foresee a universe or a possibility or any sort of world where India can effect a trade deal with the US and still continue to maintain, good bilateral ties with Russia? Does that possibility exist? And would you say that would be the ideal outcome, vis-a-vis India's relationship with both these countries in this context and in this world that we live in at this time?
Look, certainly that's an ideal situation. But yourself saying it's an ideal situation. But, ideal situations almost never take place. And so we are in a situation where, as I said, we are not sure what the US wants. I have a feeling that the US wants zero purchase of oil by India from Russia. And I have a feeling that the US is also looking to break India-Russia ties, because that's also linked to their view of BRICS. So I think this is a demand, this is a kind of a zero-sum demand. This is not, that's why I said that if it's just a matter of tariffs, just a matter of, how much you put on goods and how much I buy from you, how much you buy from me, that's okay. But that's why I think that this has a geopolitical context. And the problem is that the person who is executing this policy on behalf of the US is a highly erratic person. And we really don't know at what time he does what. But one thing has been consistent. He has been consistently hard on India in the last 6 months. He has been consistently hard on India. So I don't see why India should go out of its way to accommodate the United States. We've been accommodating the United States. In fact, Mr. Modi sent a delegation just before he took over. Our officials were in Washington, D.C. We have offered preemptive reduction of certain tariffs. We agreed to buy oil from them. All this was before the Liberation Day tariffs came up. So we indicated that we were willing to make a deal with the US very clearly in January and February. But what we have seen is a systematic hardening of the US stand. And so, as I said, my problem is, the US is the biggest country in the world, the richest country in the world. I would like good relations with the United States, but they are making it very hard because we don't know what they're really after.
Right. And Mr. Joshi, that really does reflect Donald Trump's exasperation and desperation to sort of deliver upon some of his promises, including closing that war between Russia and Ukraine. He said that he would do that within a day, if I'm not wrong, and that really hasn't happened. He also tried to sort of take credit for an understanding that was arrived at earlier this year between India and Pakistan. However, India has countered that narrative. India has countered his recent narratives as well. Senior, let me take this question to you then. Does Donald Trump find himself on the back foot? What is your opinion of that, given the fact that he's not been delivering on promises, inflation, and of course, recessionary tendencies still remain a concern in the United States, and of course now global leaders are lashing out. They are pushing back.
You asked me to comment on what Donald Trump thinks. I think that's the worst kind of question one can get. But on a serious note,
I'm asking you, do you think Donald Trump finds himself on the back foot now, and is he at the risk of getting isolated?
Well, I don't think he's at the risk of getting isolated, but obviously there are threats for him in the US because he has not delivered, as we can clearly see it on his promises, which he made, as for example, when he spoke about ending the Ukraine conflict within a day. He later, if you remember correctly, said that he was ironic. It's said that leader of such a big and powerful nation can be ironic about such things. But I think we have to see, I see media calling his latest moves, including the ones on India, the tariffs, a drama. So we have to see whether these drama really will end or there will be more of it. But I want to go back to my previous point that a long-term vision, is something that countries that are experiencing the effects of this drama have to weigh on and have to stick to their long-term vision. And that goes well for Moscow as well, because Moscow said repeatedly that it will have to complete whatever it has started. It has to achieve the goals that it has stated. And we understand that the Ukraine conflict is a sign, or rather the outcome of unresolved issues in Europe, the security issues that the countries could not agree on. So Russia said firmly that unless this is resolved.
Right. Absolutely, Xenia, and there's a lot of issues that Donald Trump needs to resolve. Of course, everybody in the world is watching that meeting that is to take place between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. What is going to be the outcome of that meeting, and how soon a peace deal could be arrived at? Is there going to be a thaw between both the sides, and what are the ramifications that India is going to face as a result of the outcome of that meeting? We'll have to wait and see the outcome of that. But for the time being, Gaurav, Mr. Joshi and Xenia, thank you very much for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now.